For years, an organization called Freedom Oklahoma has been organizing and advocating to ensure all two spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and full spectrum of people in this state and among the 39 federally recognized tribes have the dignity, resources, and community to thrive. And today, I am so grateful to have members of Freedom Oklahoma here with me today. Solus and Cole, thank you so much for joining In Depth with Dion.
Thanks for having us here.
Yeah,
So,
thanks.
could you start, for those who aren't aware, could you start by introducing yourself, your pronouns, your roles at Freedom Oklahoma, and anything else you want to share?
I can go first. My name is Solus Evans. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a trans masculine person working at Freedom Oklahoma, and my role is Director of Community.
Mm.
I am Nicole McAfee. I use they, them, or they and she pronouns. I'm the executive director at Freedom Oklahoma, a role that I've been in for almost 5 years now, which feels wild.
Congratulations.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I know that has come with a lot of um, trauma as well. We're in a state that has made it its mission among the Republican leaders to demonize and vilify anyone that doesn't fit into their frame of who
Mm-hmm.
belongs as an Oklahoman. Um, so I guess, I mean, I got lots of questions, but what is it like doing this work, really? As people who are impacted by the decisions our lawmakers are making.
I think it, for me, is really like a balance. I think of like, right, I spent my day yesterday for 13 hours with like the House playing on my phone and the Senate playing on my laptop so
Mm.
that I could be ready for whichever might hear one of the bills that were expecting targeting trans folks. And there are days like that that feel really draining.
Mm.
Um, and in this work, like I think even in the hardest parts, and maybe especially in those difficult moments, there's also so much really great community and joy.
Mm.
And whether that's just like meeting outside in the sunshine with Solus as we talk through whatever we need to do, and like having the flexibility to like make that space and honor outdoor time and like collaborative time
Mm.
as something we value in the work, or it's like building a tool that we know people need, or things as light as like we did a series of book recommendations based on Pokemon recently,
Okay.
and like seeing everybody share like, oh my
Gotta
gosh, I really love Psyduck and now I'm gonna read this book.
gotta read them all.
It's something that brings me a lot of joy.
So finding those moments.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's like a roller coaster. You have
Mm.
a lot of highs and a lot of lows, and it feels like a lot of times the wins can be very difficult to find because in this legislative you don't have a lot of like concrete wins in that way, so you really have to be truly thinking about the power of people and organizing and like finding those individual wins. And so it's something as simple as like on Monday we spent time in Stillwater with Stillwater GSA from their high school
Hmm.
and got to spend time with 15 to 18-year-olds and learning about their power and watching them step into their queer identities. And like that kind of win is what is the most powerful and kind of keeps you moving through it, and being able to see somebody who says that they're extremely introverted but learning about speaking up to their
Mm.
principal and speaking up to their classmates about how to create a safer space and create a safer community and helping them find their power. And so it's really going back to the root of organizing and the power of people, that you got to like find those wins and find those happy to keep you sane and to keep you
Mm.
balanced, because otherwise you, with us not being like a direct service providing organization, it can be hard with a capacity building and organizing to find those wins sometimes. So
I mean, I hear you. There's so many battles to fight, so many bills to follow, uh, and try to get passed or defeated. I'm as you're talking, I'm thinking about just how Freedom Oklahoma has inspired me over the years because it's one of the only organizations that I know or see being visible in advocating, for queer people. And as someone who was closeted for, most of my upbringing, I came out, I think, in 2025, or I came out at 25. I like partially came out. So I did like a soft launch.
Yeah, so
So
many of us do.
really, okay.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay,
In multiple launches.
right. Like, I think I first came out as bi because I was like, I want to give my parents like, I want to give them a chance. Like, maybe I'll have some grandkids. Like, I don't want to just, I don't know. I want to give, ease them into it. But then over the years, a couple years after that, I just was like, you know what, y'all. I think I even said I'm just gay. Like, just it is what it is. Like, deal with it. But it was the consistency of organizations like Freedom Oklahoma that helped me to continue coming out. Really, a lot of us look at coming out as like a one time thing, a moment. But for me at least, it's been a journey,
Yeah,
you know. And so,
that's fair. I was at a
yeah.
Freedom Oklahoma event when I decided I was, well, not decided, but came to my truth of being trans. It was at the People's Hearing actually a few years back when we came to do some stuff. A friend of mine was like, we went to the bathroom and battle buddy.
Mm,
You always got to have somebody to go to the bathroom with you in those kind of spaces to make sure that you're safe.
mm,
And I ended up using the women's restroom, and I came out, and they were like, you deserve to use whichever restroom you identify with, and like nobody can take that truth from you. And it was in that moment that I was like, oh my God, you know what? Like finally somebody has seen me for what I feel I am, and that's
mm.
like trans man. And that's when I started. After I left that event, I started to get on testosterone. So I definitely am there with you on like
Mm.
Freedom Oklahoma setting out that space for us to be able to step into our truth.
It's powerful. Like having examples of people living their truth. Um, you know, um, I remember the very first time I had ever met a trans person. I was a high school senior in Lawton, Oklahoma, and I was working on this old white couple's farm because my mom had made a deal where if I do some labor for them, they'll help with this scholarship that I was trying to get into this program. Um, and it was some grueling work, y'all. It was
Farm work is
oh man, it was hard work, but it was rewarding work. He was like, okay, I can do this. And I assumed as farmers that they were just, some conservative rural folks, and so they were having this like this potluck at the end of the workday, and they invited some friends over, and I was literally in the field, and like one of their friends came up the hill and introduced themselves to us, and I was like, "You're friends with these farmers? Like maybe Oklahoma is more than what our leaders say we are, And so, can you talk about um, the work that you're doing now when it comes to advocating and organizing and how that plays out on the legislative level?
yeah, I think that um like for context, Freedom Oklahoma started in the like marriage equality movement.
Mm-hmm.
It came out very much of a like we need to keep particularly like gays and lesbians informed about attacks on marriage.
Mm,
And that when I stepped into this role, there'd been a like start of a mindset shift of like, okay, what does our advocacy really look like? And it has been a joy in the last 5 years to say like, okay, how do we make that more expansive and think about like the long legacy of cross liberatory efforts
mm-hmm.
to ensure that our work looks more like that.
Yeah.
And I think in part that means that it has been like some shift of where we spend our legislative advocacy capacity. Like I don't spend much time at the Capitol,
Mm,
in part because it's just like really hostile. It is bad for my spirit to be in that building. So we do a lot of information gathering and sharing. I build a giant legislative tracker each
Yeah.
year, uh,
It's amazing.
and try to keep people informed as much as possible. But I think we're really thinking more about like where there's possibility to move in this moment.
Mm.
And so that's been doing some like creative work about thinking how we engage tribal governments in
Mhm.
creating safety for Two-Spirit and indigiqueer people.
Mhm.
It has been like thinking about where we can build some advocacy resiliency that starts as local as possible, like where people can build some of that power and create protections or see wins. Um, and so I think that in this moment, like we are still in a spot where oftentimes we are asked to respond to advocacy on the terms of the people who are causing harm.
Mm.
And I think especially like back to the start of youth gender affirming care bans, and we're now seeing much more expansive bans. But one of the things that was hard for me, even at the start of that, was like, yes, I want all youth to be able to access gender affirming care. And the reality is that I know most of our community members can't access any healthcare.
Mm.
It's not just like gender affirming care, it is a broader access issue. And so I think we're in a moment where we're trying to really rethink how we engage in a way that is more holistic and doesn't just sort of hold this defensive spot for a limited part of community, but really thinks about broader needs and how
Mm.
we can show up in this moment and beyond.
I mean, that's fair. That's fair. I mean, uh, there's so many misconceptions, and like I literally was reading an article from the Associated Press that just broke this morning that the Olympics Association or whatever had banned trans women athletes from competing. And the article went on to say that I believe there was no trans athletes in 2024 and only one in 2021. And when we think about the state bans and attempts to have federal bans on gender affirming care, or saving women's sports, that these Republicans ain't watching anyway. Um, it, it's always it's politicians trying to. It's a very small population of people.
Yeah.
It's a very small population of people. And so, why the hell is it anybody's business? Why the hell is it this much of an issue? And we talked before. I think part of it comes down to it's something that they use to gain support for their, fascist nationalist causes. Um, I want to ask y'all about. I want to get into the history a little bit, if that's okay. Um, I was shocked to learn that uh, in Nazi Germany, one of the first attacks that one of the first targets of Hitler's regime, was book burnings and targeting information and educational institutions regarding uh, trans identities or queer identities. And that was never taught to us in my education.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, um
It's the same playbook happening now.
yeah, I would count myself as particularly lucky in life experiences. I was an international studies major in undergrad, in part because growing up in a small town, like my goal was to get as far away as possible. And international seemed like a pathway to do that. But when I studied abroad in undergrad in Switzerland, I attended an event at the Geneva like Queer Community Foundation
Mm.
and heard the last Pink Triangle survivor speak just a few months before he passed away. And so pink triangles were used in concentration camps by the Nazi regime to mark queer people.
Mm.
And in life things, like he had been living in a small town, saw a news article that said the last pink triangle survivor had died and said, actually, I'm here, and decided that it was important to tell his story.
Wow.
And so, like, that opened up for me in college just this, like, this whole part of history that I hadn't learned about, had not been taught or exposed to. And I think that one of the like coolest things I get to do as an adult is really try to delve into learning those pieces of history that oftentimes are like purposefully excluded and or limited because of all of the records that were destroyed, right? Like when you destroy like the institute serving queer and trans folks in Berlin and all of the records and books there, like yes, that history is less accessible. And I think about there's a really great book called The Other Olympians by Michael Waters, which is about both that attack and like the Olympics as a fascist gendered event space, like through the Olympics in Nazi Germany, but before and after too, and sort of the long history of gender policing in that space. And I think that there's so much we can learn from that. And this is a playbook that's been used before. It is not new. That the harms extend beyond who they intend to harm. Like I know that the intersex advocates have put out lots of like pushback to the IOC rules in the last few days, saying like, hey, this impacts intersex people in particular, and you can't begin to know how many intersex athletes you have who are potentially impacted by this.
Good point.
And so I think that the history piece in digging into that in whatever way like is accessible to you is an important piece of the work.
Solis, you've been on your own journey. How did it feel when you what's your journey been like?
I've been very blessed and very privileged to be able to be fortunate enough to have top surgery and be on gender affirming care testosterone for about 4 years now. I still get little butterflies in my stomach when people correctly address me out in public. You know, I've been starting to get a lot more sirs and he and him, and my beard is finally coming in. So
We both trying.
right. It's still a little patchy, but I don't know if you can see it. Zoom in a little bit here for me. But no, it's been great, but it definitely has its days where it is hard, and it can be. You know, I feel for the people who aren't in spaces where, like Cole was saying, you don't not only have gender affirming care, but you just don't have healthcare in general. You don't have a job in general. You don't have an ID that properly addresses you, and so going places like even just to the club isn't something that's accessible or anything that you can do anymore because people. I was in a point where I wasn't quite passing yet, and my ID would get rejected, and I wouldn't be able to get into a club because
At the
people
club?
they would be like, "This isn't you. You have a fake ID," and so
Wow.
you have to start thinking about things that like, what is it like when you're out in public, and you know, like on a day like today when we traveled from Oklahoma City, it's not a great reality for me to stop at the halfway point and use the restroom because am I gonna have to fight being potentially arrested, or do I hold it and potentially like get a UTI from having to hold my bladder? And you know, like, so there are days when you have to choose the battles, but I've just been truly blessed to work in a space where I do have healthcare and have a great boss and a place where I could take time off to have that surgery. But there are just so many people out there who don't have that, and I'm, you know, I feel for them, and especially our youth. Like last night a bill was heard where remind me which bill it was where they took away youth
House Bill 3130.
3130. They added an amendment to where you wouldn't be able to have access not only to gender affirming care but mental health gender affirming care. So even just talking to a therapist about what you're going through, and we all need therapy, but let
Mm,
alone going through this journey, you need a lot of therapy to be able to unpack the amount of times, like we were talking about earlier, you have to come out on a day-to-day
mm,
basis, and you've got to decide, okay, do I want to have this conversation with somebody who's not addressing me properly, or do I just want to let it go? And like, it sits with you when you don't get addressed properly. I was at the park the other day with my friend's nephew, and this person kept calling me she her, and I was like, first of all, what are you looking at? Because with this beard and like this
mm.
outfit, I'm giving a bit big he him. So like, you really got to be pushing right now for the she her. But it sits with you in an uncomfortable way, and
Yeah.
you're just kind of like, damn. And people think
People
that
go out
we
of their way to
to
misgender you.
to misgender and like to push harm onto you, and it's just like, people think we're trying to, we've got like this huge agenda and we're trying to do all of these crazy things, and it's like, bro, we're just trying to live.
Mm,
Like, we just want to be able to go to the grocery store, we want to be able to go to the doctor, we want to be able to have family, we want to sit down at the end of the day and eat a good meal with our friends. Like, we're not trying to do anything crazy. Like,
mm,
I want being trans to be the most boring thing about me,
mm,
and like, I want that to just be something that is, and not something that is so overarching in my life. Like, I want to be known for so much more, but in this world we live in, it
mm.
becomes something that you have to think about every second of the day, because it's a survival.
Everything you're saying, there's so many parallels
Mm,
to other struggles for justice, even among groups who don't want to recognize those parallels. Um, you know, you talk about you want it to be the most boring part of you. That was one of the bigger struggles I went through when it came to coming out as gay. Is like, I don't want that to be my whole identity. I don't want people to see me as the gay guy. Like, I want you to see me as the, you know, journalist who ain't afraid to ask anybody the right questions, you know, and being gay is part of my identity. It's not all of my identity, you know. And I feel like, you know, I'm gonna piss some people off by saying this, but I don't care. There are parallels to um, the Black Civil Rights Movement. Um, in so many intersections, because what you're talking about, I just want to go to the grocery store, I just want to go to the gas station. There were times we couldn't do that.
mm-hmm,
There were times where we had to think about holding our bladder for the whole trip.
mm-hmm.
You know, you can think about the Green Book and places where we could and couldn't
And that's getting
stop.
recreated right now.
And that's exactly what trans people are dealing with right now. I mean, Oklahoma is trying to erase, um, I believe we've already passed bills when it comes to passports or identification
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
documents. Um, and so when we think about the history, you know, Bayard Rustin was a gay black man who was the architect in many ways of a lot of Dr. King's speeches and strategies. Um, but he was relegated to the background simply because he was gay. Marsha P. Johnson,
Mm-hmm.
you know, it, if we, even for those who don't know who Marsha P. Johnson was, if we can imagine history without Marsha P. Johnson and where we might be today, it could even be worse than what we're dealing with now.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, she was a black trans woman who, you know, led the protests in New York that helped to change minds. When it came to, there were times where you couldn't even go to you couldn't, as a gay person, you couldn't go to a club um, and just socialize,
Mm-hmm.
right, without police coming in and breaking down the door. Um, and so there's so many people,
Yeah.
so many. I'm just naming a couple.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, you know,
I think a lot about um there's a really great new book on Marsha P. Johnson called Marsha I think it's called The Joy and Defiance of Marsha P. Johnson, but it's by Tourmaline,
So good.
and like gives a much deeper picture of Marsha's life than I previously had, like including starting to think about like her disability justice organizing around like madness and being perceived as
mm,
crazy in spaces, and so like not being taken seriously as an organizer for that reason. Also like her her life and activism with HIV is like briefly touched on. And I think a lot about that, but like you talk about the ways in which like trans liberation fights look a lot like Black liberation fights. And I think that like one of the important things that I've learned is like, so Sylvia Rivera, who is a Latina trans person and organized with Marsha P. Johnson, like fought at Stonewall. Like she was first influenced by the Black Panther Party, like saw them in action. After Stonewall met with Huey Newton, which I would
Oh,
have
wow.
loved to be a fly on that
I
wall.
did not know that.
And while the Black Panther Party was like facing some of their own internal struggles around queer and trans inclusion, like Sylvia Rivera and Marsha P. Johnson and STAR, the sort of street transvestite action revolutionary org that supported mostly like trans youth experiencing homelessness and like built this sort of found family. They did a lot of organizing with the Young Lords. Like,
Wow.
I think that that connection to cross liberatory work has always been there because queer and trans people,
I've always been here.
yeah, like, and hold all these different identities, right? Like, aren't just a monolith of like white able-bodied folks, like that. Oftentimes, it has been the Black and brown trans women, especially, who have been at the front of the fights, and so like those intersections of their identities have always shown up in the way that they think about liberation and the people that they partner with in the work to get us closer to freedom.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, you'd mentioned HIV, and I feel like that is an issue that also people don't want to talk about, people don't want to actually understand. And certainly our lawmakers don't want to understand. Can you talk about the work that Freedom Oklahoma does around advocacy when it comes to HIV?
Yeah, I think I was really lucky when I started at Freedom Oklahoma. One of our national partners, the Equality Federation, had just hired a health policy advocate, Michael Elizabeth, who's a person living with HIV who really wanted to expand the way we think about HIV modernization and work that needs to be done. And so when I started at Freedom, I had just come from the ACLU of Oklahoma. I had done a lot of organizing around the criminal punishment system, and it felt like this sort of very like moment of kismet, like, okay, this is some knowledge I have and some things we can start to think about doing together. But in that early time together, I learned that Oklahoma still has HIV criminalization on the books in two places, actually. So we have a piece of criminalization that's related to disclosure of your status.
Okay.
And like is built into a very old statute around venereal diseases and intentional spread. And we see that used oftentimes in situations where like people are charged because they don't have proof that they disclosed.
Wow.
And in a way, like it doesn't, even if someone didn't disclose, like a lot of that is rooted in the stigma around HIV that still exists, in fear about treatment, and criminalization is not helping any of that. In fact, it's hurting it. And then Oklahoma also has a statute that criminalizes people who are sex workers if they're HIV positive. So even if whatever the sex work is, like, is not something that could cause transmission, even if they are undetectable and therefore untransmissible,
Right.
if you are HIV positive and you are a sex worker and you catch a charge, you can get an enhancement just for your HIV status.
And they're felonies, right?
Yeah, and
Both are
in learning that
felonies.
too, like we started to see that while Oklahoma kind of adopted those of their own accord out of fear, that there was also a point in time where federal Ryan White funding required some sort of criminalization response in order to receive funding. And so we learned that there are several tribes that have this criminalization on the books too. And while there's still a a lot of work we're doing to try to figure out how often these charges are used, which has been a long process with OSBI to try to get that data. And Williams Institute has been really helpful in
Look,
starting.
if we need to file an open records request, let me know.
We're working on it, and
Okay.
part of it is just the like struggle of the like back end system, but also the like limited resources that OSBI invest in the data part of it. But like we know that the charges, especially at the state level, they're being used. Like people are still being charged for their HIV status in recent times, and so for us, that's looked like building work initially with Representative Maury Turner when they were still in the legislature around repeal and repair. So it would repeal the HIV criminalization statutes, but also create a pathway to repair for people who've been criminalized, to have that removed from their record. So it would be retroactive resentencing as opposed to expungement. So
I see.
less cost barriers, particularly because we know that expungement requires that you have paid all of your fines and fees, and that like this shouldn't be criminalized, and so people should have those fines and fees wiped along with everything else from their record. And while we haven't seen it move here, it's inspired folks in Nevada and Indiana
Oh wow. Okay.
to look at the like retroactive piece. It's let us think about like starting conversations with tribal leadership around the importance of taking it off the books, even if it isn't something that the tribe uses to criminalize people. And to really just think like more holistically about how we approach this intersection of criminalization and stigma, of public health at a time when we know that like Oklahoma still ranks disproportionately high among like late testers and what's considered rural burden of HIV. So like a disproportionate number of rural Oklahomans are still diagnosed like much later because they test much later. And we know that like stigma and lack of resources and lack of healthcare drives so much of that. So figuring out how we continue to have these conversations, I think it is really important piece of the work.
You know, it's an issue that it goes across political ideology. I've seen, and it's an issue that is super relevant in the Black gay community as well. Black gay men have some of the highest rates. And I think it comes down to everything you just said, the stigma, being afraid of being criminalized if you find out that you are positive, maybe not having access to healthcare or services in your area. In the 80s, of course, with the AIDS crisis, our leaders decided that it was better to just let people die. And now it seems the solution is let them rot in prison instead of trying to figure out how we can make this more accessible, how we can erase stigmas so people can voluntarily get tested sooner, and create pathways of restorative justice and repair.
Yeah.
I think too, just about like we know that the healthcare system within Oklahoma prisons is not adequate, and so like what it means to send someone with an HIV diagnosis to prison, a place where your immune system is going to be constantly tested, where
Damn.
you might not always have access to the meds that you need in a timely
Definitely not.
manner.
Right.
But also about like people living with HIV in prison in Oklahoma who aren't there because they were criminalized for it, but are still suffering from that. I think back to like early pandemic when there was a lot of push around like medical release.
Yeah.
That initially we thought that there was going to be this huge list of people eligible in Oklahoma, and then it turned out there were like 12.
Wow. What?
Yeah. That initially they were like, there'll be several hundred, and then they were like, actually, we've determined that the way the statute is written, it's a list of 15 people and 3 have already been released. But several of those people were people living with HIV, and I remember like watching those hearings and thinking about that, like what it meant to particularly be that immune compromised in a system that is not providing you adequate care.
Yeah.
And then at a moment where that, like, that being immune compromised could mean like your death. And so I think that there are just like so many layers to the harm, and so much work to do. And in addition to the like stigma and lack of resources, that like Oklahoma has also not updated our HIV education statute since I think the early 90s. There was an attempt to do it back in 2019, but the governor vetoed it, even after it passed legislatively. And so that like there's also just this lack of knowledge, particularly because of the stigma around it, of like, is this something we talk about in TUS LGBTQ plus spaces, like for folks who know that isn't only a queer and trans issue and don't
Right.
want queer and trans people to like be tied to something that's still stigmatized. And I get that there, right, is a whole generation of queer people who died from AIDS, and complications related to AIDS, who died from the failure of the government to adequately respond to the crisis. But also a generation of people who lost a lot of folks they love and like feel some level of burnout around that. But I also think that to some extent it has been like
Excuse me.
an abandonment of like the work around HIV/AIDS now. And so when I show up in spaces, oftentimes it is Black leaders, particularly Black queer and trans folks, who are still doing most of this work. And I think that that is also an important piece of the like, where else is there room and need for solidarity, in this phase of the fight. And there's a lot of space that the community as a whole can do better.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And
Let me hold it right there. I'm gonna get this out. Allergies, y'all.
you're good.
90 degrees today.
Yeah.
It was like 40 earlier this week. So, what were you gonna say? I'm
I
sorry.
was just gonna talk about the other factors of like what happens when trans folks get incarcerated. I got arrested almost about a year ago for riding my bike in Scissortail Park, which apparently had a curfew. I didn't know about it. It was about 2 a.m. and I at first was mistaken for a houseless person, and then when they got closer and found out I was trans, the slurs of transphobia and homophobia came, and they found out I had multiple IDs because my identifications didn't match, and it ended up in a physical struggle, and I ended up going to Oklahoma County for about 15 hours and had to be housed in the female ward, where I was held without my meds, housed with female inmates, and that was a fortunate side because usually trans folks are put into solitary confinement because they don't know what to do with them. So if you are too much of a passing person, but they, like you have to go in and you have to get checked and you get put naked and they're looking at you and they're trying to decide what to do with you. So I was
Like you're a
fortunate.
specimen. Like you're not even human.
Right. And like I think about trans women who sometimes they don't put in solitary confinement and put into men's ward just to watch them get assaulted and beat up by their other fellow inmates that are in there. And so it's just like that's a whole nother barrier of something that you're having to think about when you're just trying to live with some kind of like health care issue that you're having.
And you went to Oklahoma County. That's one of the most
right.
deadliest.
No new gels.
It's deadlier than Rikers.
I have never seen such conditions. The air vents were completely clotted with mold. Like you would look up and you couldn't even see through the air vent. It had so much mold in it. You had a bathroom that wasn't working. We had no toilet paper. We were fed once. I was there for about 16, 17 hours and I was fed once the whole time. There were women in there that were at least in their 80s, 90s that were being withheld meds. The whole time that they were in there, they weren't medicated. I didn't get my meds while I was in there. I was put on suicide watch, and I was supposed to get medicine. They threatened to put me in solitary confinement, and I was like, please don't do that. Like, let me stay in here. Like, I'll be good. Like, I'm fine. But like, those are the things that you have to think about that are happening whenever, like, you think about Kansas, who just invalidated everybody's driver's
Yeah.
license. So if somebody is caught now driving without a license, that they could face having to go to jail or having to go to prison, and like those are the conditions that they're gonna have to be put into.
Well, first of all, I'm glad that you survived that
Yeah,
experience.
thank you.
Um,
Lots of trauma. Still undoing a lot of
Unpacking.
that. But like anytime I see a police officer, I'm like, oh, God, here we go. Like,
Mm,
and they just have so many biases, you know. And like once they find out you're trans, or once they find out they were like, oh, you're part of that letter community, like, and then it ends up in like they have so much power and so much control. And you think about the HIV decriminalization of that, like. In the assault, I ended up spitting at the ground, and they said I spit on them, and he acted like I had COVID, HIV, like all the things. He was just like instigating it out the wall.
you mentioned the word passing, and that is a term that Black people and queer people understand fluently. It's a language, really. Um, it's a language of survival, but it can also be an excuse to not support those who aren't passing.
Hmm.
You know, I feel like being closeted is kind of part of that. And I want to be respectful because I don't mean to say, I don't mean to shame anyone for being closeted. Everyone has their own time and process. uh, and not everyone is safe to express themselves freely. But I know for me, part of why I stayed closeted so long was because I enjoyed the privilege of people not judging me based on my sexuality as someone who quote unquote could pass. Now, when I came out and I asked my dad about it, he was like, "Boy, I'm your dad. You don't think I knew?" But but there's, there's something about there's something to be said about the term passing because it can be used for good or it can be used neglectfully. And for a lot of people, there is no passing, and I want people to understand, people who maybe feel like this isn't an issue that impacts them. Maybe they don't think that they know anyone who's trans, but it's not just about how you look on the inside. It's more so about who you are on the inside. It's not about how you look on the outside, but it's more about who you are on the inside. And there's so many people right now listening who don't know that they may have a loved one or a friend who just needs that confirmation of support
Yeah,
to let them know that, hey, I would like to transition. I'm thinking about transitioning, or this is who I've always been. I just haven't shared that with you.
yeah,
I think about the recent documentary Will Ferrell made
yeah. I know what you're talking
with his
about.
longtime buddy who worked for Saturday Night Live. I can't think of the name. I'm sorry, but me and my one of my friends watched that when it came out, and it was just a good ass movie. It was a fun movie, and it was an enlightening movie because it reminded so many of us that what we thought was no longer an issue with the ending of the civil rights movement for a lot of people is their day to day. So, what do you do? What are some ways that you affirm yourselves and that maybe other people listening um, could practice to affirm themselves?
Mm, that's a good question.
I think, and my experience is different from Solis's. Like I am non-binary. Like my spouse and I can read as a heterosexual couple out in the world. Like, and I think that one of the things that I continue to like learn and push at myself is like some of the idea that I think really comes from like Black trans feminism as a politic of opacity. Like
Mm.
as opposed to transparency or visibility about ourselves, of like, for me, the outcome of the fight for gender liberation isn't like some level of parity within a binary. It's accepting that like not only transness, but like that all gender is a spectrum at all times, and that like when we talk about access to bathrooms, it isn't your perception of someone who is like passing, which is often the example used by like allies fighting these things on the floor of like, what if this trans man came and used the
Yeah.
women's bathroom? Like, how would you feel about that? It's this idea that we all deserve better than having our gender and our identity policed at any given time, and that policies that like cause that constant policing and pushing us into categories hurt everyone. And I think a lot about, there's a poet I really love, Andrea Gibson. I was talking to Souls on the way here that I just watched Come See Me in the Good Light, which is a documentary about the last few months of their life as they battled cancer. But they have a line from a poem that says, "My gender is the undoing of gender." And that is something I think I've always really related to, that like my journey has been finding my space in a non-binary identity, but also challenging other people's ideas of what then it means to be or look like I am non-binary, right? That on even on days where I like dress in femme clothing, like that does not invalidate my identity, and that like everybody's gender is just this really expansive opportunity. And I think of like my affirmation is often rooted in Ruth Wilson Gilmore's idea of abolition geographies, that like we can practice abolition by like creating in these spaces abolition geographies, and that like one of the best things about transness in my mind is this idea of it, like the abolition geography of your body, that like to have not just autonomy but like body sovereignty, um and to like decolonize and unwrap all of these societal expectations about who we are and how we were assigned, versus like instead finding the places and words for ourselves. Like is the greatest part of work we can do, and it's something that like can be accessible and I think liberating to everyone, not just to trans folks. And so that is how I try to like affirm myself through the hard moments of like, if I am feeling someone else's harm about my identity, like no, I'm not gonna let that come and step into my like abolition geography of my body. Like this is mine.
It's always so hard to go after them. I should have went first. I would say chosen family is big. Finding a few, if not one person that you can trust to talk to about it and to try things out with. I remember when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to name myself, doing some sample names with friends and letting them kind of call me something for a little bit and see how that felt, and like just the joy in that. And then like the first time I got myself a packer, and being able to be at my house by myself and just wear that packer around, like in the joy and the affirmation that I got from something like that. You know, I still struggle to wear it out in public sometimes, but knowing that I can like go home and just be truly myself. So like even allowing yourself that small space of joy, if it's not like you're not quite ready to go out in public, like you still have your space, you still have your home where you can be that way and be true to yourself. And I'm thankful for Cole and my chosen family for reeling me in, because I do get kind of stuck sometimes in the binary of like, oh, I want to be a he him so hard that I get into that toxic masculinity, and I have to like step myself back and be like, okay, I don't want to be that kind of he him, you know, like I want to be the good kind. But it, you know, passing to the extent to what your goals are, and if passing is not one of them, that you're there and like you do want to ride in that fluid lane, like just knowing like what at the end of the day your goals are and how you can achieve them. But yeah, I would say like having your own safe space, having your own safe people to try things out with, even if it's just one friend or two friends, to just go and say, hey, here's what I've been thinking. Here's a name that I've been trying out.
Mhm.
Can y'all kind of help me fill it out? Call me this for a little bit. Is a great way to kind of slowly start affirming yourself and testing the waters.
And I feel like everything you're saying should be relatable to people because to people who may not think it's relatable to them. And I'll give an example. There's these culture wars when it comes to black men and black women I've seen over the years. I don't know if their algorithm is doing it or just certain influencers, but like there's times where you know a black man will be hanging out with his friends and showing love to another heteronormative black man, and then you'll have some people in the comments like, oh, you know, he's touched, or that's gay, or you
Mm-hmm.
know, and it's like there's this thing where it's kind of a joke but not a joke, where a lot of times black people will be like, oh man, I can't even whistle in the park anymore without being called gay because you know you can't express yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you can't express love for another person platonically without someone assuming something. And I feel like a lot of that comes down to the policing of genders, the policing of gender norms and expectations, and it's killing people. It's killing straight people. You know, when you think about white the suicide rates of white rural men in Oklahoma. The Healthy Minds Initiatives did a study earlier this year, maybe last year, that those rates are increasing in Oklahoma, and this is a state where every branch of government is supposed to reflect that demographic,
Mm-hmm.
and yet their own constituents are dying. And a lot of it comes from this toxic idea of what gender is supposed to be. Men aren't supposed to ask for help. Men are not supposed to seek help. You
Mm-hmm.
know, if we can't figure it out on our own, then oh well. You know, men are supposed to do this, and you know, to just the expectations of what a straight man is supposed to do and not complain about. You know, um, and when it comes to women, you know, a lot of times, especially when it comes to black female athletes who are not non-binary or not trans, still being
Police.
ridiculed because maybe they have more muscle than they expect women are supposed to have, or whatever it may be. And so, even at the Olympics, there in recent years, from one of the African countries, there was a woman who had to fight being banned because their testosterone levels were higher than whatever arbitrary level, you know, and it comes down to those binary gender norms.
Yep.
And so it isn't just impacting, you know, it's impacting the full spectrum of people.
Yeah.
A lot of us just don't see it that way.
Yeah. And you say that, and I start thinking about the gender affirming care that's also could be impacted because you think about gender affirming care and people just think testosterone and estrogen and like for trans people, but like males also need to take testosterone sometimes when they have lower levels, or when
Mm,
you think about women who have like facial reconstruction surgery or want to get like their eyebrows tattooed on or
mm.
like any kind of cosmetic changes like that help them be affirmed in their own
Right.
bodies, that is also gender affirming care, and that happens on the regular and all the time. And they're going to end up being policed at the end of the day for that too, or
Mhm.
potentially not be able to have that. And so you have to think about like all the ways that it's not just going to be trans people at the end of the day. This is just the start.
That's a perfect example because I'll add one more. Pete Hegseth, the Department of War um, guy, um, they added a policy affecting razor bumps
Yeah.
that primarily impact black men. I forget the term, the health term, but black men are more likely to get certain types of razor bumps, and but they still have to shave just as frequently as anyone else in the military. And this policy, if they can't, basically, it would ban them from the military if they're not able to get it under control. And that is a form of gender affirming care ban as well,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, yeah. It's a like yeah, this. arbitrary policing of gender that exists in so many spaces. And I mean, even in the most recent attacks on gender affirming care in the Oklahoma legislature, so there are two bills moving right now. One that's targeting state funding from the Senate, so it would impact trans people of all ages. So it targets anyone that receives state dollars in any way. So like it is being posited as like trans people have found this loophole in that they're getting their health care paid for. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry, is that it's not what the healthcare system is supposed to do? But then the iteration moving through that just passed out of the House, it is this more expansive ban that does the work of trying to limit the one exception in the minors ban. So it would now impact gender affirming mental health care too. But a part of the debate on the House floor was one of the very few medical providers in the legislature saying, well, the way I'm reading this, it would impact some of the patients I've had who are like minors and are cis women who have needed breast reductions for their health. And could we put a caveat in there to make sure that they're not impacted by this? And they didn't amend it in real time, but the author said, sure, I'd be, open to that conversation. And just the fact that I think that people pushing for this, like, don't think of all of those other caveats of like, yes, this is meant to impact one group of people, but what does it mean when providers are so afraid of potentially being criminalized that they won't provide any breast reductions, they won't provide any puberty blockers for people experiencing precocious puberty? Like, yes, there may be this caveat written into the bill, but like, is it really clear enough to ensure that you aren't criminalized if you're a provider? That those things create these systems where it's constantly a question of like, well, are you trying to seek this care because of precocious puberty, or is it potentially a gender thing that now a provider is afraid of providing? And that we write laws in Oklahoma especially often to target one group of people, and then the impact is so much larger. It is the like everyone who potentially has care impacted, but also all of the providers who leave. Like, we've seen so many doctors leave. We saw so many pediatricians leave after the youth gender affirming care ban because they couldn't serve their patients. And we already have a big disparity, like gap in the number of pediatricians we need versus how many we have. Like, what does this do? What?
And that impacts all kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we lose a pediatrician.
Yeah. Especially when we lost so much of the OU health class, of like graduating doctors who were there when the Roy G. Biv Clinic was closed by the state as an ARPA funding mechanism. That like they in real time went from being in a learning environment and treating these kids to seeing the state shut down that care just because they could. And so many of them like showed up and tried to advocate and then said like, I can't stay here. I can't in good faith work in a place like this where my ability to treat kids is constantly politicized in a way that could impact their treatment or could impact my ability to provide care.
Like if your license was risked.
Yeah.
Or your or jail.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they've been doxing people like at the same time, so you have to worry about getting doxed and like what would happen to your friends or your family and like where you're living and things like that.
We know that Oklahoma lawmakers are targeting our communities. We see it every day. But what motivates me to keep going, right, is to have a vision of the future that I want. There's a quote, right? We have to be the change we want to see in the world. What do you envision as a truly free Oklahoma?
I I go back to a Miriam Kaba quote that I remind myself of constantly, that hope is a discipline. And so part of my practice for hope has been trying to engage in some like futurism, to think about not just this like policies I'm fighting against, but what is the world I want to see. And for me, I best describe it as like the end of a dinner party. If you think about being at a dinner party, end of the night, like everybody is fed. Oftentimes, regardless of whose house it is, people are helping clean up, are like packing leftovers for one another. There's side conversations where people are catching up. There's oftentimes like a storytelling and information sharing component. If there are kids there, it typically happens that like there's some group care for the kids and not just a like nuclear family unit.
Right.
There can be like music, there is laughter. And for me, like that is the world that I want to build, where people are fed, where they are pitching in however they have capacity, that there isn't like ownership or exclusion of a space, that like joy and laughter and music and stories are a part of that. And like that is what I want for everyone.
I love that.
Yeah. There's a book called Everything for Everyone. I can't remember who is the author.
Amy O'Brien and I think Abdul Hani is the other author's last name.
Y'all are well read. I need to get back in the library.
But it's a future, like a queer futurism book, and it has a lot of like communal style living, and it's like what happens in 2070 or so, and it just talks about all these different communes that have been popped up and built. And I think that is a lot of what Cole is explaining, and a lot of what I would also like to see, of just like more chosen family coming together and taking care of one another, less capitalistic values, less gender binary values, and all of that, like patriarchal and all of these things broken down into where we're just like truly loving on one another and being with one another and taking care of one another. We have healthcare access. We can freely use the restroom. We can freely ride our bikes. We can freely go to the store. Have access to the things that we need without it being such a barrier of like, oh man, there's so many things that I don't have, and there's so many things that I'm doing to survive. But we have the safety, we've got the means, we've got everything. We're not just surviving, but we're thriving.
Bro, that is so similar to, I asked Dr. Tiffany Crutcher this question a couple weeks ago.
Shout out to Dr. Crutcher.
You know, and y'all both almost to the T. Just let me live.
Yeah.
Just let me live. Give me the same opportunity, the same pursuit of happiness as anyone else, and just let me live. You're not asking to indoctrinate people. You're not asking to force people to change their beliefs. You just want to live.
And really live. Like not just
Scrape
get by.
Yeah.
Not constantly like work from a place of scarcity or fear. But like identify the fact that we have more than enough when we share, and that like we all get to live fuller, happier lives when we like come together and build shared resources and figure out how we feed and nourish each other, how we like fill in capacity gaps, how we care for the next generation of kids in a way that doesn't isolate parents or burn them out. Because we helped with a friend's nephew, and like I did 2 hours of dinner support for a 6-year-old and was like, oh, that is a lot. That is a lot of energy.
Someone tap in.
Yeah.
And we like put people in situations where they've got to do that on their own often. And I just want the world where, none of that conversation was about gender, because it's just like a fact of life, like
Yeah.
just a piece of your identity. And right now, in all of the ways that policymakers try to use it as an impediment to your ability to exist, like should instead just be one of many things about you as you go about
Yeah.
like finding joy and community with your people.
Yeah. Imagine if your podcast was just a creative, fun, artsy like thing and not having to be all this heavy, heavy things.
Social abundance. Our leaders reverberate the mentality of scarcity economically, politically, and socially. And it feels like what you're describing is abundance in community, abundance in relationships, abundance in everything we need to thrive. Cole Solis of Freedom, Oklahoma, I'm so grateful to have y'all on In Depth with Dion. Thank you.
Thank
Thank you.
you.
Woo!